Ken, Derek brings up a point that is used by them as a point of pushback, which is that it's not indoctrination, it's exposure or exposing. There's nothing wrong with exposing people to these ideas, which I think all of us, even around this table, would agree that as long as you're exposing people to ideas, but you've got to show both sides, that's what exposure is. How do you tell the difference, or how do you, help people understand the difference between what is exposure and what is indoctrination?
Well, I think you kind of hit on it. I think exposure is you expose folks to the idea. You talk about the theory. Where's this coming from? It's coming from this guy called Karl Marx. If you go all the way back to the antecedent of all this stuff, which is Marxism, socialism, what he was looking for. I think it's okay. You talk about that. What I'm finding is that people who or avowed socialists in a lot of cases have no frame of reference. When you ask them, have you even read anything that Marx wrote? The answer is always no. So they really don't know what they're really advocating for. So I think that's a fundamental problem. I have no issue at all with, in fact, I would welcome it. If they would actually read the Communist Manifesto in these colleges of education, I think you'd have a far fewer of these folks who think that's what they want to get, because even that small document, that pamphlet, lays out some very horrendous things that people who have any concept whatsoever of freedom or independence or just want to live their own life, that's nowhere in that document. And so I think that's okay. But then you also ought to talk about the kind of blessings that we have in this nation that our founders provide us in our foundational documents, which frankly, these teachers and the students don't know any better than they do the doctrine of the ideology of socialism as it was actually written, not how we kind of sugarcoat it and at these universities and say it's really good. That's not the history. There's not a historic discussion of these things as they really are. And I think that's the fundamental problem.
And Ken, I'd like to build off that if I can, because I think you bring up some very good points on kind of the Marxist antecedent of this, the Gramscian march, if you will. And one of the issues that I'd like to point out as a distinction, and to be honest with you, I'm fairly ignorant of myself. So obviously Marxism, at least if taught true to form, as you would say, is obviously one that delineates class struggle, right? It's the haves and the have-nots, rich versus the poor, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, so on and so forth. Nowadays, the left seems to be more steeped in a schism of victimology, or or basically, the oppressor and the oppressed, one that's much more like I tossed Foucault out there earlier, but one that's more of an amorphous power struggle. How did we get from now? And that's not to say that Marx isn't part of the current, the current doctrine. It just seems like a much lesser part. For every one Bernie Sanders, you have several AOCs. In other words, how did we make that leap? Because it seemed like if Marx was just a foot in the door, where did all these other forms of grievance come in to animate the philosophy there?
Well, I think it still goes back to that base set of ideas. It's, if you look at what Marx wrote, he talked about oppressor oppressed. So they just relabeled whoever it is. And it's again, if you look at kind of how things over the last 10, 15 years have fallen out in our country, some of these very contentious social issues that we see. It's LGBTQ rights, and you're going to see certain. I'll fall back to this in a second. So you have that. You have the BLM. You have the 1619. You have now you have the October 7th stuff that we're not celebrating, but recognizing the anniversary of that. If you look out there, the people who are protesting for those key things, you're going to see some very unique signs out there, and they're always there. It's Socialist Party USA, Communist Party USA, the Party for Liberation and Socialism, Revolutionary Communist Party USA. You will see their signs in every single one of those events because they latch on to whatever the crisis du jour is, because they see that as a means to take power, just like Lenin did. In 1917, he saw the country at a crossroads, and he just adopted the theory and cobbled it into what he said it was going to be, using that term, the bourgeois, the oppressor, the oppressed, and it's continue on through its history. They will grab to whatever crisis or any type of divisive idea out there to create conflict in hopes they can gain power through it. So I think that's still there.
Do you think that as they're going through the College of Education, do you think that they are aware, or are they directly told, your job as a teacher is to go be effectively an activist for these policies? Like you're going to be at the front line of changing culture and changing society. Like you have this immense power, and maybe they frame it as a responsibility or an obligation or something, and say, look, you're going to be the front line. The future of the country, or the future of the world is depending on you to go in and shape these minds this way. Do they feel like they're part of that project when you talk to teachers?
I think in a lot of I think they think they're part of a movement. I think, plus it's also so baked into the system now. I don't think they think anything's wrong with that. I think they think that's now the purpose of education, because that's the pedagogy they've been taught with these kind of texts that we've been talking about, the pedagogy of the oppressed, the politics of education, where the goal was to do just that, politicize these children, these kids. And then in order to gain a society that's in their image, which is what they're really after. So I think that's really what it is. I think they've been swimming in it so long, you just don't know that you don't really know. And it's so bad that when I was a college professor, I say it's one of the greatest compliments I ever had as a professor, because it was unique. And so my kids, at least one or so every semester, would tell me, you know what, we don't know where you stand politically. And I would ask the question, oh, really? So, is that not the norm in every one of your classes? And they go, no, all we talk about is politics. So I think that's where we are, because that's what's going on out there.
I think I was gonna say, I think you've articulated, really hit on kind of where I wanted to go with this, which is, you said that you think that teachers now believe that that's their job, is to go do what I described. And I'll just tell you right now, that's not what parents think the teacher's job is. And I think that's where you have the current fight over this right now, where, with parent empowerment and school choice, and, whether or not to send your kids and your money to the university. That's, how do we get back to a place where, because I think this is blindsiding a lot of parents, to find out that their kids, that they're spending, tens of thousands of dollars to send their kids to these indoctrination places, assuming that the purpose, assuming that that the teacher's on the same page with them, that they're going to go learn about the world and they're going to be exposed, right? They're going to learn about truth, and they're going to be exposed to both sides, and they're going to learn critical thinking skills. But that's not what's happening. And I think you really hit on is that nowadays teachers think that is what their job is to shape these minds into a particular ideology, and parents don't believe that's what it is at all. That's what their job should be at all.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. At whatever level, for the parents who are paying for it, I would want to know, like for my kids, when they went to college, I wanted to know what they were taking. I wanted to know what was going on in the classroom. Now, they went to a private Christian college, so that was a little less indoctrination from what they got. But a lot of my friends' parents, or friends who had kids at the university level, that's what they were getting, a lot of stuff. And when my friends would talk to them, that's what they were getting. And I think it permeates a little easier to control, I think, or should be anyway, is what's going on in K through 12, because parents can physically get in there and find out. I would think. I know I did as a parent when my kids were in school. We were there, especially after we had a couple brush ups finding out some of the garbage my kids were being taught. That books that they were not going to read, reports they're not going to write, and I was not very popular with a lot of my kids' teachers.
Yeah, Derek, that we obviously saw that in Texas, and it was shocking that, of course you would expect San Antonio, Austin, places like that, but we were seeing it in rural communities, which is really kind of where we're going with this, is that it's not really about, urban versus suburban versus rural. It's just teachers. If you're going to go get a certification to be a teacher, you're going to be exposed to this, to what's there. And so whether you go teach at a small rural school or you go teach at, the biggest school in San Antonio, you're going to be one of these little social justice warriors indoctrinating young minds.